Hey Floxies and the community world, YouTube, Facebook, or if you're on my private Floxed University, I want to welcome you to this video. I haven't posted a video for a while, for a few months, and the reason is because I've been deep into doing a bunch of research, and today is August 20th, 2020. And just to kind of give you an update of what I've been doing is I've been studying my rear end off. I've been applying new protocols and doing new tests. So what I do now as of August 20th, 2020 is substantially quite a bit different what I did 3 months ago based on this new testing from Great Plains Lab and all the time and effort I've put into studying, learning, and mastering what we call the organic acids test. So what today's video is going to be on is mold and mold toxicity. In my opinion, everybody needs to be checked for mold. Here's what happened is prior to me studying my rear end off on this, I was missing cases and they had mold that was never diagnosed, or they didn't realize they had mold. So at this point, I don't ever want to miss a mold case. You know why? Because you can get the best glutathione IV therapy, NAD therapy, magnesium IV therapy, vitamin C therapy. You can get polypeptide therapy. You can get the greatest, most expensive IV therapy known to mankind, and you won't get well if you don't realize that you have a mold problem and you handle your mold. That's just the bottom line of it. Mold is very toxic, and in my experience, most of the Floxies that come to me have an underlying mold problem that was never discovered. So my clinical experience, I said to myself, you know what? Here's one thing I don't want to do. I never want to miss another mold case on a Floxie, because the Floxie community is suffering. They need help. They're chronic problems. Right? You know you're suffering, there's chronic problems, and you need to rule out mold. If you rule out mold, you don't have mold, then a whole nother ballpark opens up. But if you have mold, then that needs to be figured out and addressed. So I'm going to shed some light on mold, why mold is so dangerous, and where it's found. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so what we're really going to be talking about here is mold illness, and then SIBO and leaky gut. They go basically hand in hand with the mold. So if you have mold, your gut is completely trashed. So let me say that again. If you have mold, your gut is completely destroyed, and I'll explain why that is in this video here. So this is what we're going to be looking at here. We're going to be looking at mold, black mold. There's mold that's in the buildings, and then there's mold that you actually eat. Now, the majority of people are going to be exposed to some kind of mold in the buildings when the test comes back positive. Now, that mold could be current or it could be 20 years ago. We don't really know where the exposure was. This is where some of the investigation needs to take place. Is it an active current mold, like a situation that you're living in, or was it 20 years ago? Is it at work? Maybe you go to work and you're in a moldy building and you're getting exposed to mold. So that needs to be investigated on where it is. Is it current or is it in the past? So that's one thing that needs to be investigated. Now, here's what happens when it comes to the mold. Okay, the mold produces spores. Okay, so this is really critical. So just like pollen, mold, all right, is basically mold is a yeast, and it produces spores. And I'm gonna use the analogy. It's just like pollen. So you see this stuff right here, right? This is the mold right in here. Now this mold produces the pollen right in here. Let me grab a better highlighter so we can see that a little bit better, if this is going to work. So the produces these spores, okay, and these spores are what we call myotoxins, okay, so they're myotoxins produced from the spores. Now you can see here is these would be the spores, right, and then we breathe the spores. Now, one thing with breathing, you can breathe through your nose or your mouth, but at the end of the day, both pathways, both the nose and the mouth, end up going into your stomach, right? And these spores are they can live through anything. Like they don't actually like blow up or dissolve until they get to a boiling temperature of like 210 degrees. So the spores are very, very resistant to many things. I mean, the mold has been here way longer than human beings, and the mold has developed survival instincts that are almost impossible to like eradicate and kill the mold. You can't actually kill the mold. What we're trying to do, so you have mold, we're trying to excrete that mold out of your body. And there's a whole bunch of protocols on how we do that. That's not the intention of this webinar here. The intention of this webinar is to give you an understanding that this could be a missing link for you and your health is mold exposure. All right. So the mold here, okay, so we have the mold produces the myotoxins, which is what I would just say the pollen, and then that's in the air, and then we breathe the air, and then you can see how these the myotoxins or the spores kind of go down the pathways. Now let's go over some basic anatomy. So here we have your nose right here, okay, then we have the mouth. So you can see here how at the end of the day both of them come to the same passage right here, and then one goes to your lungs. This would be your lungs in here. I'm just going to put a heart right here, lungs. And then the same passage is here. This goes down your esophagus. This goes right down into your what? This goes down to your stomach, okay? So the majority of mold, you can actually say we're breathing it in. And when we breathe it in, if we breathe it in, it ends up in our stomach because that's just part of the way God designed us. And the mold needs to be excreted out. And this mold, the mold spores, are like super glue on your stomach and your intestinal system. So when you actually breathe in the mold, this is what is causing gut problems. So is mold damaging your gut? Well, there's 100% certainty that mold destroys your gut. Mold has developed very, very keen mechanisms to kill things around it, right? So let's kind of go over like what that looks like and what I mean by that. Okay, so back in the day, there was a discovery, and we all know about it because it saved millions and millions of lives, and that is penicillin, right? So back in the day, you know, I'm 48 years old. Back in the day, we would go to the doctor if you had a cold, and you would get an antibiotic, and the very basic ones were penicillin. So let me kind of go over this because I think as I show you these experiments and what actually happens, your eyes will open up and say, oh my goodness, I really need to make sure that I don't have mold exposure. I don't have myotoxins in my body. We need to figure that out as a priority. And if you do have it, then we know that there's a problem. And the thing with these spores of myotoxins is they can cause weird neurological symptoms all over your brain, central nervous system problems, anxiety, depression, muscle pain, tendon pain, all these weird things that you go to the doctor and say, it's all in your head. Here's some antidepressant medication. These myotoxins have been shown and proven to cause a whole bunch of weird neurological symptoms in your body. So this is the experiment way back when. I think it was like, I can't remember the year, 1928 or something like that. Okay, so what they did is, this is the penicillin right here. Let me change my marker because I want to make sure you guys can see this. So this right here, I don't know if that's much better. Okay, so this right here, this is the penicillin. Okay, so this is mold. Okay, so the penicillin is mold. So penicillin is mold, okay? Then what happened here, and then the streak right here, this would be the bacteria right here. Staphylococcus, okay? So this is bacteria right here. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to erase some things here so you can see what's happening. So what they discovered here in this experiment is when they did this, is you can see this zone of inhibition around here. This penicillin killed the bacteria, the zone of inhibition. So some scientists are like, oh my goodness, mold can actually cause and kill bacteria. And mold is a master at killing bacteria. So if it kills bacteria and you breathe it into your gut and it produces all these toxins, what do you think is going to happen to your gut bacteria? It's going to be all killed. All all the good guys are going to be dead, and all the crabgrass, all the bad guys that are really resistant start to overgrow, and then you get small bacterial overgrowth. Small bacterial overgrowth, dysbiosis, your gut's trashed. When your gut's trashed, your brain's trashed. You have these weird neurological symptoms. So this is all the stuff that is happening with penicillin and mold. Mold is a master at killing anything around it. Now, just getting back to this picture right in here, I mean, the mold kills, if there's any other kind of mold, I mean, mold will kill other mold. It's survival of the fittest. So this stuff is very, very toxic. Okay, so this right here is just a diagram of the penicillin. It's a natural antibiotic. This just kind of shows you how they process it, and the certain molds can kill bacteria, and they have a very good system to this. Now, one of the things, as we know, as decades have gone on, is the antibiotics have become more resistant, and maybe you're Floxed and you took the fluoroquinolones, and those are like the atomic bomb of antibiotics. Why? Because the old school penicillin doesn't work anymore, and the fluoroquinolones even do more damage to your stomach and your digestive system, and it's just a spiral case downward. Now, right here, this is the test that we do. I'm going to show you this kit right here. This is from Great Plains Laboratory. This is the test that I do. We do the organic acids test and the mold test. It's very, very simple. We mail you this kit. You do a first morning void, and we get tons and tons and tons of information on this. Not just mold, but we get tons of information about yeast, bacteria, Candida, mitochondria energy production, oxalates, lactic acid. I mean, this test right here, folks, is a game changer. This is a game changer for Floxies. This is a game changer for any patient that comes into me, is knowing how to interpret this organic acids, and the skill set comes in is knowing how to interpret it. It's a very, very, very complex test, and I've mastered implementing and interpreting this test. So this is a test that we do. It's mailed to you. It's very simple to do at your house. So this is a test that we do through Great Plains. So this is checking penicillin. So it's a type of mold. And you can see right here, we want this to be less than 37. This is at 1,584. Mycophenolic acid, which is just basically a fancy name for mold. So what's happening in this person's gut? It's being destroyed. That's in the test. Here's another test right here. Gliotoxin, you can see this right down in here. So we want this less than 200. This person is sitting at 3,379. So what do we know right now about their gut? Their gut is being absolutely destroyed. When you look at this mycotoxin, you have to look at it as like the spores, and these spores produce toxins. Okay, another analogy would be like a seed. Like if you have a seed, like let's say you're going to go to the garden and you're going to buy some seeds. The seed actually isn't alive. That's just like the spore. That's like the mold spores that are produced. Now, if you would take a seed of, a bean seed, and you'd rub your finger on it and you'd smell your finger, you'd be able to smell what that seed, you'd be able to smell something, right? That's the smell of the seed. That's the same thing with like these mycotoxins, is they have these toxins that are produced even though they're not like live and growing, that kind of thing. This is the dangerous part about them, is they leach their toxins out on a consistent basis. Now, one of the things that happens is when you have mold, then what happens is the bad guys, the bad bacteria and the bad yeast, Candida, and I'll be explaining what the difference is between bacteria and yeast, okay? So what happens though is when you have mold exposure, Candida runs crazy, which is yeast, okay? Candida in your gut is on a rampage. It starts to grow and grow and grow and grow because that's just the environment it grows in. It grows in an environment that's very weak and doesn't have a lot of good bacteria. Now, one of the things is what these Candida produce is called oxalates. Now, this is also on the organic acids test. Now, let me go into this. Now, this right here, oxalates. Okay, so what is an oxalate? So an oxalate is a crystal that forms. If you know anyone that has had kidney stones, they're usually calcium oxalate. They're crystal forming substances like that form, and they can form in the kidney and cause excruciating pain. If you've had one, or you know of anyone that's had a kidney stone, you know they're very, very painful. Now, what can happen on a very less level is these oxalates can be forming in your tissues. So in your tendons, Floxed, you have tendon pain, right? These oxalates sit in your tendons and form crystals and cause pain. Same thing with your muscles. They'll fit in your muscles and they'll cause pain. So if you've been Floxed and now you have fibromyalgia, you have tendon pain, these crystals can form in your mitochondria, they can form in your brain tissue and your nervous system tissue and start to cause problem. Same thing with urination. They can form in your urinary tract, and when you urine, it can cause pain. So oxalates need to be checked on everybody. This is why I stopped doing a couple tests. I stopped doing the food sensitivity testing, and I've stopped doing the hormonal panel testing. Why? Because I realized that I have to work within a budget and a means so people can afford the care. So I've eliminated those two tests, and now am I doing this here? I've ran lots and lots of these organic acid tests now. I just think it's more clinical data. Now, the reason why I talk about this oxalates is because Candida, which is a yeast, okay? So if you have mold, that causes Candida overgrowth. And on the organic acids test, we can see if you have that. But the Candida poops, and it poops oxalates, all right? So if you have Candida, your oxalates are going to be high. On top of mold will produce oxalates as well. And when we talk about Floxed, now I've helped thousands of Floxed recover, is y'all have pain, right? You have tendon pain, your tendons can't heal. You have muscle pain, or maybe you have weird neurological symptoms because these oxalates will actually form in the nervous system and in your tissues. Now, this is just a picture of the oxalates. You can Google this, just Google crystal oxalates or calcium oxalates, Google that. Here's another oxalate. You see this thing here, like if that was in your urinary tract, would that be painful? If this was in your tendon, would that be painful? If this was in your muscles, would that be painful? You just look at that. Google this stuff. This is not Dr. Hugh's opinion. This is actually medical fact. That's why these things cause so pain. Now, when it comes to oxalates, there's many, many things that can be done to help oxalates. Get rid of the mold. Control the yeast, do a gut repair, do a low oxalate diet, take vitamin B6. There's lots of things. Take spore biotics. There's lots of things that can be done. And again, this isn't about a protocol. It's about hopefully gathering you a link so you can understand that this is possibly another missing link. So here on the organic acids test, there's a couple areas of oxalates. These three things here indicate this. So here's oxalates. Here's another guy, oxalate. Look at this. Look at the range here. You see the range, 6.8 to 100, 173. 185, pin the needle on this stuff, pin the needle here or move the needle right here. So this needs to be evaluated to see, are you possibly suffering from this? Now what happens is when you have mold, you're going to have Candida overgrowth. Okay, now what I like about this is if you read this part right in here, these are all the symptoms from Candida. Painful and persistent gas and bloating, chronic yeast infections in women, constipation, diarrhea, migraines, weight gain, depression, brain fog, eczema, skin problems, food sensitivity, chronic fibromyalgia. So these are the things that happens is these Candida, which is a yeast, they produce nasty things, man. They produce ethanol. They produce lactic acid. They poop, right? In order for them to survive, they produce toxins. And these are all the things that will contribute to a body not getting well. So when someone comes to me, I'm like, what are we going to do different, right? You've probably went to the doctor and they do the same old freaking labs, blood labs that you've done 100 times. Well, you don't need to do the same lab. You don't need to check sodium 10 times to know that that's not the problem. You don't need to check whatever they're checking, a CBC or whatever. You need to do different labs to get different data. This is why it's so critical to have a functional medicine approach with an expert that knows what needs to be done and can take you from A to B very quickly, okay? So here, this is all the stuff, this is by Candida, okay? So another thing here, I'm just going to read this top letter right in here. I can't highlight it, but when overproduced, Candida breaks down the wall of the intestine. Okay, so we just talked about leaky gut. So you have leaky gut and penetrates the bloodstream, releasing toxic byproducts in your body and causing leaky gut. This can lead to many different health problems ranging from digestive issues to depression. So the Candida actually causes leaky gut, breaks down, you have inflammation, and then it also causes leaky brain. So this is another thing, and it could all be back to where you were exposed to mold. You have mold in your gut, you have these mycotoxins in your gut, and it's never been investigated. This test, actually, the Great Plains test, the organic acid test, has been around for a while, but the mold testing here, the urine testing, has only been on the market for about, I think about 18 months to 12 months to 18 months. So it's fairly new to the marketplace. So anyway, just want to let you know, this is Candida. This is what it looks like. If you can blow this up right in here, there'd be like little spores in here, right? So when these things bust open, there's the spores come out, and then these are the ones that cause all the toxins. And remember, the spores are just like the pollen on a tree. I'm in Minnesota here. There's lots of pine trees, and in the like late spring, if you park under a pine tree, your whole car will be like yellow. That's the pollen, that's the spores, that's the mycotoxins from the mold, if we're talking about mold here, okay? So now we're going to kind of move on. We're also going to talk about C Difficle, which is bacteria. All right, so in a second, we have yeast, and then we have bacteria. These are two different separate things. So bacteria and yeast. Now, if you have mold in your gut, mycotoxins in your gut, both Candida, okay, which is a yeast, and C Difficile, which is a bacteria, they all can grow and prosper in your gut and lead to nothing but bad things, bad things, okay? So this is a great picture of your gut. So this is done by the, it looks like the University of Minnesota here in Minnesota, or maybe that's Michigan. Anyway, so here's what they did. They've taken the gut cell. This is your small intestine. And this is after 24 hours of exposure of the gut lining to C Difficile, which is the bacteria. You see, this is normal here. Okay, it says normal lining. And then 30 hours after exposure, look at the damage. See this right here? This is the same thing as that we're talking like right in here. It's all damaged. It's all inflamed. See, this is nice, smooth here. It's broken up. So here it says after 30 hours, C. difficile toxin has started to damage the cells, triggering inflammation and fluid buildup. 36 hours, inflamed. The cells have burst here. These are the bursting of the cells here. You see, you don't see any of that stuff right here. The cells die. C. difficile spores are produced. They leave the colon. Diarrhea and a bunch of nasty GI problems start to occur. Okay, so here I just want to get your head wrapped around it, because it took a while to get my head wrapped around it as well. So we have yeast mold, and then we have bacteria, and they're two different things. I want to give you a good visual, because I think visual aids are way more important than speaking. So we have yeast. Okay. So yeast is kind of a broad term. Okay. So yeast is kind of a broad term. So the way I would describe this is we have Ford Motor Company, right? And then Ford makes the Ford 150, and then they make, the different types of cars, the Escort, the Taurus, whatever it is. So we have Ford, and then the Ford makes different things. Now, when it comes to your body, when it comes to yeast, we have yeast would be the Ford Motor Company, and then it produces different things. It produces Candida, and then it also produces all these different molds as well. So molds are yeasts, okay? Now, here we have a bacteria. Now, the only, there's a few differences, but the biggest difference between a yeast and bacteria is the yeast has a nucleus and bacteria does not. So C. difficile, Clostridium difficile, this study right back in here, okay, that's bacteria. So bacteria does not have a nucleus. Yeast does, which would include Candida, and then all the mold, okay, they have their own nucleuses as well. So that's really the difference between bacteria and yeast, but there is a difference between those two, okay? Now here's what happens. This is a really critical slide right here. There's a valve. You can see this here. This right here is your large intestine right here, and then you see all this other stuff. Here's your small intestine. So right in here, you can see that your large intestine meets your small intestine, right? So this valve right here, just the name is called the ileocecal valve, located between the small intestine and the small intestine and the large intestine, okay? So what happens here, let me get you a different picture. So I like this picture better. So this is your large intestine right here, and then this right here is your small intestine, and this is the valve. So what I really want you to see here is the size difference. Most of your bacteria is in your large intestine. Most of your bacteria is in your large intestine. That's really in your large intestine. That's really where your poop starts to take on a form, right? That's really where the bacteria starts to get in your BM and start to degrade all the food, and the fermentation is really in your large intestine. Okay. Now just imagine here. This is your colon. Okay. This is the size of your colon right here, and then this is going to be the size of your small intestine. So you can see the different size. Okay, now here's what happens. When you have gas, bloating, constipation, your small intestine gets bloated like a balloon. Just imagine your small intestine as a balloon. It blows up, okay? Now what happens when it blows up, let me just erase some of this stuff here. When it blows up, okay, so what happens here is your small intestine gets bigger. It blows up. Then what do you think happens to this valve right here? This valve, this should be very small, and this should be big. So if your small intestine is blown up because you're constipated, because you have gas, and you have bloating, and you're not making a bowel movement on a regular basis, that valve right there is open because the small intestine is too big. It can't close it, right? It's a little valve, just like you need to close that thing up. Okay, this is the valve. This would be the hole between your small intestine and your colon. And when your colon, when you have bloating, gas, diarrhea, it's large. Okay, it doesn't close. Now, guess what? This is your colon right behind here. Guess what happens to all the bacteria? All the bacteria comes from your large colon into your, boom, in your small intestine. And now you get small bacterial overgrowth, dysbiosis, more constipation, more diarrhea, more bloating, more fibromyalgia, more tendon pain, more brain problems, all because you have mold as a possibility, right? You want to rule that out because the mold allows all these bad guys and things to continue to grow. Here's the Candida in your gut, just good visual, I thought. So here's Candida, which again has a mold, and it has a nucleus. So you can see this nucleus right in here. There's a nucleus, and these things just start to bud off. They start to bud off, and that's how they grow. They bud off, and then they start their own little, another spore, right? And then check this out. Look at the mitochondria here, right? So these things need mitochondrial function as well. So if you already have mitochondria dysfunction because you were Floxed, and you know all about that, and then you have Candida overgrowth and yeast, I mean, they're using the energy, right? Like these yeast, you have to realize these yeast have been around trillions of years. They are smart little creatures. They're going to get the energy. They're going to get their mitochondria working before you're going to get working, before you're going to get your ATP and your production. That's just how these things work, okay? And then you see these little things here, these green things, those are the spores. So when the thing bursts open, that goes in your small intestine, wherever it is, and that produces all the nasty stuff and problems. Now, this is part of the organic acid test too, which again, it's very, very powerful test. So bacterial markers. So this person here has a bad gut. So this would be like SIBO area here. This is bacteria markers right in here. You can see this is high. And then here we also check for C Difficle, Clostridia markers. You can see C diff right here. You can see that this HPA is elevated. There it is. So this is an indication of someone that has bad gut. Here's another person here, Clostridia markers here, number 15 there. You can see it should be less than 93. So when I look at these, I'm like, you got a bad gut. Well, let's go back and let's look at mold. So then is the mold in the current situation, or is it a past marker? And some of the stuff you don't really know. You got to kind of treat and figure some of the stuff out. You got to figure the dots. You got to connect the dots. It's not everything is really straightforward. Okay. Then also to check this out, these bacteria and the yeast and the bacteria, the Clostridia, can produce lactic acid. Look at this. This is also elevated here. So lactic acid, you know, like you're sore, if you work out and you get lactic acid buildup, your muscles become sore. That's the same thing that these critters produce. Is the byproducts is one is lactic acid, so you can get a lot of muscle stiffness. Then, I mean, this test is just amazing. This has to do with your mitochondria markers right here. All these fancy different names right here all have to do with how well your mitochondria is functioning. Now, when you look at this person, you know, I look at this person, I'm like, OMG, like we found a problem. Look at her mitochondria. It is not working. Everything is high, right? So what happens, this would be an analogy. So these are the different cycles. These are the different pathways that your mitochondria has to do to produce energy. It's intricate. It's a lot of biochemistry. This is what I really want you to get out of this picture, out of this diagram when you see all these highs. It'd be like, you know, I've never been to California, but I would imagine this is what it would be like. As you're on the highway, you're in a traffic jam for 2 hours, okay? Then, so then you get past that traffic jam, and then you speed for maybe 5 minutes, right? There's clear for 5 minutes. Then there's another traffic jam for another hour. And then you get past that traffic jam. Then you go for 5 minutes, and then there's another traffic jam. This is what happens when you see all these highs here, is there's tons and tons of traffic jams in your mitochondria. And if your mitochondria is not functioning well, guess what? You're not going to produce ATP. If you're not going to produce ATP, you just cannot get better. That's just what happens, you know, when you have these problems, right? This is why, in my opinion, the organic acid test has been a total game changer for my practice. I hope it's a total game changer for your health as well. I hope you found value in this. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up wherever it is. Give me a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my station. We just need to get this information and content out there, because at the end of the day, you know, at the end of the day, my commitment is to the flaxseed community and human suffering in general. And where there is help, there is hope. Let me say that again. I cannot say this enough. Where there is help, there's hope. So if you found that there is some help in this video for you, then there is hope. Take care. Bye-bye.